are protected, and that those privileges that they should be afforded are there and made available for them. And so I don't foresee any issues moving forward with those working relationships. And I think one of the things that I like that the mayor kind of pointed out is I'm kind of results goal driven. I had the opportunity yesterday in our first meeting with Councilwoman Cooper Stokes to meet with one of our city's constituents. And what I know about working with constituents is that people like quick response. There was an interest that she presented to me. There was a concern that a constituent had. And it was important to me because of how it was a concern to him that we find some quick resolve. And I think that means a lot to people. And that's one of the things that I've found in working with the opportunities I've had to work with Ms. Davis and Mr. Graham is that we share that commonality of knowing that people in Jackson and people in Hinds County don't like having to wait anymore. And they shouldn't have to. They deserve to have a system of government that works for them and works on their behalf. And since we have that pre-existing relationship, I see that moving forward, and I look forward to the opportunities we have from this position to work together to make sure that Jackson and Hinds County continues to grow.
Councilman Whitwell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Synarus, just like Councilwoman Simone said, I've known you for a long time, just with all the assistance you've given in Congressman Thompson's office, and certainly know, as my fellow council members have indicated, all of your capabilities, and very interested in this conversation today because it does appear that one of the main reasons why you're being looked at by the mayor to do this job is not just to be a bean counter, so to speak, but to really analyze what's going on and what is succeeding, what is not succeeding, and how we can make that better. Basically, from what I'm gathering in this conversation, community improvement and the social activities that we're involved in from the cultural and human services type things are very much priorities. What are some of the other priorities outside of that's been mentioned that you see as things that we really need to roll up our sleeve, get a handle on? That's question number one. And question number two, one of the things that I always talk about and think about is when you have a finite piece of pie, there's only so much money that can be split. But when you grow that pie, then you certainly have more opportunities. And so how are we going to provide the tools for our economic development team, our planning team, and to indicate to the business community, the taxpayers, and the citizens as a whole how we can better grow the economy in Jackson. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. I'll start with go with your first question. Outside of the things that have already been mentioned, I think the only other elephant in the room, so to speak, is the perception of how people feel in their homes. I think public safety as a whole is a growing current concern for a lot of people. And it's not just from the angle of police department, but it also includes fire. It includes how we preparing ourselves for large scale emergency disasters, whether it be man-made or natural. And these have been conversations that the mayor and I have been discussing, and making sure that across the umbrella of public safety, what are we doing and how are we making sure that when people go home at night, when people go to work, when people are out enjoying the city, when people are just out walking around, how do we make sure that we're reinstilling that perception of safety? And so the public safety component, I think, is the only thing that has not been mentioned, which is on on the forefront of our mind. And we've had you all had the recent confirmations of the chief of police and fire chief, and like I said, that was a tie-in to the conversation that the mayor and I had, was that certain things we need to make sure that we're addressing and keeping on our frontal lobe first and foremost. And so that's the only thing that I think I didn't mention earlier, that's a high priority for us. You asked about economic development. That goes back to what I mentioned about the cultivating an environment that fosters how good of a steward we are over what we have, whether it be money or whether it be resources. In building in an image of public safety for the city, I think it lends to what our economic development branch and what our planning and development department has as far as recruiting businesses to come back into the city. We've got to start being good recruiters, but in being good recruiters, you got to have something to recruit people to. And one of the things that I see, not just here but across the nation, that a lot of businesses and communities are concerned about is, where's public safety? And when I get there, where can my kids go to school and play? And so when we're looking at developing a city plan that caters to inviting people to come to Jackson to bring their businesses, to bring their resources, to bring their finances, the plan has to be in alignment with what people want when they say, this is what I want to call home. And so that's kind of where I see as far as another key area, the key areas I mentioned earlier within the office of the CAO. And you asked about how do we do that when we got a little pie. I'm a pie person, and what I found is how you stretch your pie is that you got to make sure that you know what the pie is going to kind of look like before you start cooking it. That comes back with being a good steward. If you know that you've got 8 people to feed, don't start cutting pies that ain't got but 5 pieces.
Yeah, that's right.
You need to know what your resources are so that you can maximize them, and that means that as Congresswoman Cooper Stokes spoke to, Councilwoman
Okay.
Cooper Stokes spoke to, is what I bring to the table as far as my relationships on the federal level, the state level, and my understanding of how cash flow works. There are a lot of opportunities financially that we can go after as a city, and we're going to have to start looking for those things to offset what's going to be cut now. The big scary word has been sequestration, but when we're looking at what the federal government is doing to cut funding to a lot of our programs, both in the community and both of what's being offered to the state, we've got to start being more innovative in the way we think about how our city is going to make to that next step. And that's going to mean looking at funding pools that we've never looked at before. It's going to mean creating, if as we've discussed, creating positions or developing positions that are already in our department so that people know how to go look for funding, how to give proper management and oversight for that funding, so that we're doing proper drawdowns and returns properly, and for the things that we gain to make sure that there's a system in place so that we're not just living off of old grants that aren't really serving their purposes. And so those are the type of things that I hope to bring to the table with my experience.
Thank you for that. I have one other question too, Mr. President. My predecessor, myself, my former council colleague, Council 2, now the mayor, Councilwoman Cooper Stokes, and others over the years have had difficulty sometimes in the claims docket. It's huge, it's monumental, and oftentimes buried in there are things that we don't know much about. Integrity in the claims docket and the system is important. We, as council members, are actually, by law, held more accountable in some ways than even the people that put it on the claims docket, because we're the ones that actually officially approve it. What are you going to do to make sure that we are comfortable and be transparent in the claims docket, so that we can make sure that what's in there is legitimate and was signed off on through the proper checks and balances and handled properly?
Thank you, sir. refer back to my cheat sheet of my 3 C's. Communication. I came from a background where communication was essential. I didn't have an option when I was at the police department to saying I don't want to communicate with the public. The public is not doesn't need to know this. That wasn't a luxury I had. In working with the Committee on Homeland Security, our biggest thing, which was a breakdown between the components of the federal government when it came down to making sure that the public was safe, was that there were walls and barriers that didn't allow for communication and transparency. Call it luck of the draw. Transparency and openness is kind of built into me. My mother, I'm kind of pull on her too. I didn't have an option of what I wanted to tell her and what I couldn't tell her. And so that's always been the way that I've operated. Even with the staff that I've had the opportunity to work with now, I've told them, I said, there'll be tough decisions that'll need to be made, but I'll never hide anything from you. And as much as I know of what the situation is and what needs to be done, I'm going to share it with you so there are no surprises. And so as it speaks to the claims docket, I want the council to know that and feel comfortable, and the mayor has expressed it, that his administration plans to be about transparency. It's not going to be as we used to say in the police days, it's not a us versus them. Jackson is us. We've got to be about working together to make sure that we get to that end. And so that's my position as it relates to making sure that we're open and available.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I have no further questions, and I'll skip on the second round. I'll get to step out for a second, but I'll be back to vote aye. Thank you.
Okay. I believe this is the end of the first round, so it's my time.
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, I just want to make sure. Mr. Green,
Yes, sir.
when you look from your left all the way around, you see government officials just
Yes, sir.
recently been elected or re-elected to be the governing body of this great city, Jackson, Mississippi, the state capital. You mentioned the people want a system of government to work for them. We want the same. Coordinating that is important. Very important. I'm glad you said that, because that's stuck in my mind, because that's all we want, a government to work for the people, and that's what the people want. Now, when you leave the elected officials, the mayor and his administration does the hiring and everything else, putting that team together to work for the people, offer service for the people. Good, excellent service for the people. Then you mention the kind of intergovernmental thing, working with other government entities, board of supervisors, you name it, federal government. All those people are elected from this city, from the community in general, to work on behalf of serving the people. Whether you're in Washington, D.C. as elected official, or state government, or county government. Something from all of those government entities should feed into serving the peoples of Jackson. You're going to be that person, hopefully, to make sure all this is kind of coordinated. We have a good system of government for the people. So you've already mentioned a little about working with other government entities. After listening to my conversation, how you see you putting all that together and having a government in Jackson that's truly serving the best interests of the people from all these levels that's supposed to come right into Jackson, right out into the community and serve the people.
Thank you, sir. And in the event, I don't answer them full, please follow up with me.
Just in general,
This is
we,
in general.
we'll talk
I-
about the nuts and
The
bolts.
nuts and bolts of
later.
it. Here's how I see it playing out. On the local level, there have been some basic things, some very, to me, elementary things as far as communicating across lines to the citizens of Jackson. To me, I think that's where it starts first. Again, like I spoke to earlier, it's about starting at home. And I think that our best cheerleaders are going to have to be the citizens of Jackson. Once we get them on board and knowing that we're serving their purpose, then I think we're on our way to reaching our state and our federal. And not to get to, like I said, not to get into too many details, but on the basics, just basics. People say that they don't like popping wheelies and breaking axles going down the streets. And there are certain things that, are going to have to happen when people are doing street construction. But when we're doing major work improvement, how are we communicating that to the public so that they know that, yes, this is an inconvenience, but this is an inconvenience that's working on your behalf. When we have to make structural changes across the government, things that may impact people indirectly or indirectly who live here, how are we making sure that that's known, and so that people have an opportunity to buy in and give their comments and speak to what changes are going to be impacting them. The mayor has spoken to it at length, the people's assemblies, making sure that there's a medium created so that information flows freely in both directions. And I think once we build up our cheerleading squad in Jackson, then I think that lends greatly to how we're communicating towards our other branches. Because these are, from like I said, from our state representatives to our state senators, these are their constituents as well. And so when, as you said, when I look to my left, I see you 7. But I also see the 275,000 plus people who stand behind you. And so the communication